Hey guys, so today's video is going to be about my son's story. So my son was actually diagnosed with PRS. PRS is Pierre Robin syndrome or sequence. So when he was born, he had an air obstruction. He was born with a cleft palate. The cleft palate is actually an opening on the roof of your tongue and a receding jaw. So his jaw was actually pushed back. And my son was actually born with a normal size tongue, but because his jaw was actually pushed back, his tongue would flip back, and which was obstructing his airway. Now, my son actually doesn't have that little ball in the back of your throat. He doesn't have that because, of course, he has the cleft palate. So my son was actually born 9 pounds 11 ounces, so he was a big boy. He was a big boy. And like most babies, all babies usually, they start crying when they're delivered. Now during delivery, he did get his left clavicle, which is his shoulder, was actually fractured during delivery. So of course, when my son came out, he was crying like most babies do. But he was crying for over an hour straight, guys. They couldn't get him to calm down. We tried giving him a bottle. We tried, rocking him and just trying to calm him any way that we could. And he was not having it. So after a little bit, my husband was actually holding him and started to notice that he was turning blue. So right away, he took him to the nurse. The nurse started doing their assessment on him and took him out of the room. And it was a little while before they came back. And they told us that he was born with a cleft palate and that his tongue was actually flipping back and obstructing his airway. So that's why he couldn't breathe. So they tried intubating him there in the hospital, and they were unable to do so. So they just put him on oxygen. And so they decided to actually transport him to a children's hospital. So right away, he was admitted into the hospital. And the children's hospital was actually an hour away from where I delivered him, from where I live. So it was an hour away, guys. I had to stay in the hospital, of course, till the next day. So they had to take my son to the children's hospital. And as soon as upon arrival, the first priority for him was to try to get him to start breathing on his own, because they were just giving him oxygen. They wanted to actually intubate him so that he would be on a ventilator, so that the ventilator would breathe for him. So I believe 1 or 2 doctors had tried to actually intubate him, but they weren't able to do so. So they actually called a specialist. I forget what they're called, but they're the specialists for the ears, throat, and nose. And she was great. She was able to intubate him. She did have a little bit of problem doing it, and it was mainly, she told me, was because he was actually swelling. His throat was actually swelling, and it was because they were trying to actually intubate him prior several times, and they were not successful in doing so. But finally, she was able to intubate him, and their main priority for Gus was to get him to start breathing on his own, and in doing so, he was going to have surgery. So the plastic surgeon that was actually working with us, he's amazing, guys. He's amazing. He's a great doctor, and he actually told us that there was 3 different surgeries to choose from for Gustavo, but that Gustavo was only a great candidate for one of them. But I'm going to go ahead and explain all 3 of them. So the first one that they explained to us was going to be the tracheostomy, which is going to be an incision in the throat so that they're able to breathe. So that was one. The second one was going to be the tongue and lip adhesion, which is where they would get your tongue and they would tie it actually to your lip. So they would do incisions to have the lip to the tongue, the tongue to the lip. And that he would have to have that for about 9 months or so, if not a little bit longer. And the last surgery was actually called the jaw distraction, And for the jaw distraction, what they have to do is they would make 2 incisions on the side of your jaw, and they would input 2 devices that would actually, so they would break the jaw on both sides, making 2 incisions and putting in 2 devices that would connect to each side of the jaw, each side of the bone of the jaw on both sides. And then they would have 2 pins coming out of your chin. And those pins would actually be turned daily, just depending on the severity of the receding jaw, to make the jaw the correct size that it should be. And Gus was not a good candidate for the tracheostomy because his jaw was pushed back, and the lip and tongue adhesion, the plastic surgeon said that Gus was not a good candidate for that as well because his jaw was so pushed back. They wanted to fix that, and over time they wouldn't know 100% if his jaw would actually come out to the right measurement if they were just to leave him alone. So the best thing for Gustavo was going to be the jaw dissection. Now I know you guys are thinking like, wow, that's such a big surgery to do on a baby, and it is. It was a huge surgery to do on Gustavo, and unfortunately that was the only surgery, that was the only solution for Gustavo to get him to start breathing on his own. And so that was what we had to pick for him. Now everything turned out great, guys. He's doing great now, but so a week and a half being born, it was a week and a half, he got his first surgery, which is the jaw distraction. And during this time, the plastic surgeon that was working with us told us that they were going to have to actually sedate him and paralyze him after the surgery. And this was mainly so that they could monitor his pain, and so that he wouldn't be moving around and kind of compromise his healing time. Now I do have to say that this was one of the hardest thing that I had to go through with Gustavo, you know, being a first-time mom and not knowing really what to expect. And it was very overwhelming to see him. After surgery, guys, his whole face, guys, had swollen up so much because of the surgery. His eyes were so puffy. He did have a few complications. One of the complications that that Gustavo had was that his lung had collapsed, and because he was paralyzed and sedated to monitor his pain, he was unable to move at all. So the nurse, he had his own nurse, so the nurse would have to, of course, change him, you know, clean him, do any kind of suctioning for him. And because he was paralyzed and sedated, he had a lot of secretions in his lungs. And how they explained it to me was that when he was breathing, the ventilator was breathing for him, so his lungs were actually opening and closing. But because he had so much secretion in his lungs started to become sticky and eventually just collapsed on him. And I remember getting that phone call, and I mean, I was so scared. I didn't know what to do. Me as a parent, I couldn't do anything. I felt helpless. I felt like I couldn't do anything for him, and it was very hard. And they told us that they were going to do the best thing for him. And of course, he had his own respiratory therapist that would have to come in, and they would have to suction him to get all the secretions out of his lungs, so that his lungs would finally, it was only one of his lungs that would you know, open up on its own again. And it did take, I think, 2 days for it to happen. So they had to suction him daily. His respiratory therapist was with him. You know, there was actually a respiratory therapist on the floor the whole time. And he would have 2 treatments a day as far as for the respiratory to come in and kind of suction him and look at his ventilators to see how his oxygen level was and everything. So eventually, a few days, I want to say it was 2 days, his lung did open up again, and we were a little scared. I was a little scared because I didn't know what could happen after that. So that was one complication. Another complication that Gus had was that he started turning really pale, guys. The nurse was concerned about it, so she actually asked, I believe it was the nurse practitioner, to actually come and take a look at him to see how, to get like a second opinion on him, because every morning they would make their rounds with each individual baby that was there in the NICU. And in the morning they had told me that he was looking great. So this happened later in the afternoon that he started getting really pale. So ultimately they decided to give him a blood transfusion. And within hours, I mean, his color came back. So that was tough on him, on Gus, his body. And I remember that time going in daily. I would go in daily to go see him, and it was really rough. It was really rough because at the time, of course, I'd just given birth to a baby, and my baby never came home with me. My baby had to stay in the hospital. My baby was in the hospital for 56 days, guys. And I would go every day, guys. And this was hard on me because it was so far away. It was an hour away driving every day. And depression, postpartum depression really got me. And the only thing that I believe that really helped me out, guys, motivated me, was that I knew I had to be strong for him. And I knew that me going to go see him every day would help me out. And not only help me out, but me being able to talk to Gus and just be there for him, knowing, even if he didn't know I was there, because he had to be asleep during this time. I wanted to be there for him, to let him know, that I was there. And it was so tough, guys. It was really tough. So I was told from my doctors to live as normal of a life that I could, even though my baby was in the hospital. And I know a lot of you guys are probably thinking, really, like, the doctor's gonna tell you that to live as normal of life. And I had to, guys, because if I didn't, honestly, I could just see myself just going down with a deeper depression, and I didn't want to get there. And I do have to say the first maybe 2 to 3 weeks was the toughest time, my depression, that really got me. It was really hard, but I know that I had to go every day to go see him. And I mean, as soon as I got there, I felt such relief, such I don't know, it's kind of hard to explain. I just felt so much better just being there in his presence, even though I knew that I couldn't do much because I couldn't hold him, because of course he was on the ventilator and I could compromise his airway, and he was actually considered a critical airway. So I mean, the only thing that I could do, guys, was just sit there, talk to him. I could touch him, of course, but it was really hard because during that time, he was paralyzed. He was asleep majority of the time. And it was just really tough. It was really tough. So let's see. That was the first surgery. So the first surgery was a jaw distraction, guys. The second surgery was actually the removal of the pen. So the pins were actually sticking out of his chin, guys. So they would have to turn it daily, which was in the morning, and once in the morning, once in the evening. And this was so that they could actually expand or elongate his jaw so that it would be the right measurements, so that his tongue would no longer flip back. So that was the reason, the main reason why he had to get the jaw distraction. So his second surgery was actually removal of the pins, which was about, I would say, 1.5 to 2 weeks after the jaw distraction. Yeah, after the jaw distraction surgery. So actually that surgery was actually just something that they did there in the NICU. They didn't have to take him downstairs to do the surgery. So they did that, and that was just the removal of the pen. So he still had the metal devices still in his jaw, and he got released from the hospital with the metal devices still in his jaw. But of course you couldn't see that because the incisions on the side were covered up and everything. Excuse me. So some of Gus's goals before he was able to get released was he had to go through a swallow study, and that was just to see, to make sure that when he was fed through a bottle, that it was going, you know, to his tummy rather than somewhere else. So he had to get a swallow study. Another goal was for Gustavo was he had to, we had to go through training, me and my husband, to feed him. So that was a goal for, another goal for him. He also, before being released, he had to go through a car seat challenge, which is where he has to be in a car seat for a whole hour and pass it. And ultimately he went through that and he did great. He did pass it. Now, since my son he had a feeding tube, we had to get training, of course, and we had to do CPR classes before he was released. So my son, actually, because he's a PRS baby, he is unable to suction. He can't suck. So he had to have a special bottle, and the special bottle, I actually have one here that he would use. It's called the Haberman bottle. So the Haberman bottle actually would express the milk. We as the persons that would feed him, which was me and my husband, and at the time there in the hospital, one of the therapists there that would help feeding, she would teach us how. We had to be able to pass through her eyes, knowing that we knew how to feed him at whatever level that he was able to feed. So on this bottle, there's different flows. I don't know if you can see right here. This is a small flow, a medium flow, and I guess you would say like a large flow, a heavier flow. This was the most. So the milk was actually held in this bottom part. Let me actually take it off. This bottle part, and there's actually a little valve in here. So and this is actually the white part. It's called a little membrane. So the milk would actually, this would actually flap up as we would squeeze it for him. It would flap up and close, expressing the milk into the nipple. And this nipple, guys, is actually a longer nipple. It's different from a regular nipple as for other babies. And this was due because he was a PRS baby. He had to have this special nipple. So it would actually be, the milk would actually be expressed in this part. And after it would be expressed, of course, it would come out through the top. So the way that the milk would come out was whatever line that we would work on. So we had to start from the slowest to the heaviest one, and you would have to line it up with his nose, and that would be how much milk would come out. So on the tip of the nipple, I don't know if you can see the opening there. It has a different flow. So each time we would turn it to whatever thing, it's more of an opening, and more milk would be expressed into his mouth. So the milk would be in here. We would actually press this part, and that would actually suck the milk out this way. And then when we would release it, it would come out and it would be expressed into his mouth. So we had to learn how fast Gustavo was able to drink. And at first it was so tricky, guys. I was so intimidated by this bottle. To be honest, I was very nervous to feed him because this bottle just looked intimidating to me. And the first time that Gustavo actually drank a bottle was great. He latched on the nipple great, and he was wanting to do his suction. I mean, he was doing his chomping motions to try to suck, but of course he couldn't. So he wanted to drink, so he was doing great. It did take me quite a while, and I think my husband caught on to this rather faster than I did. And I think it was mostly because I was just intimidated by this, and I was scared to overfeed him or to express the milk out too fast, because initially we are in control of how fast we are. So we had to learn how fast he was feeding. So I mean, just depending on how fast we would squeeze, you know. And sometimes since the babies, PRS babies, they are worried sometimes because they're doing the chomping motion, that they're burning too much calories and he wouldn't be able to gain weight. But actually he did really, really great. So this was the first bottle that Gustavo used for the first 2 months after he was released. So he's actually no longer on this bottle anymore. He doesn't use this one, of course, and it's due because he drinks more. And this one only holds the 60 mLs is 2 ounces, so this is 80 mLs. So this is an 80 ml, and he had to have a goal when we were feeding him. He had to at least take 90 mLs to 120 each feeding. So just depending on Gus, sometimes he would get so tired, guys. They would have to, of course, he still had the feeding tube in his nose while we were doing this training for the bottle for him. So whatever he was able to drink, of course, through the bottle was great. That's what we worked on first. And then anything that was left over in the bottle, of course, they would just give it to him in his feeding tube. So he would get tired a lot, guys, in the beginning, but after a while he caught on to it, and he did really great with this bottle. So after 2 months, he no longer uses this bottle. So he's actually on the other bottle that I have here is actually the Dr. Brown bottle, and this is up to an 8 ounce. So he's actually using this right now. Depending on how thirsty he is, he'll drink anywhere from 6 to 8 ounces now. But the best way that I can say for this bottle to describe it is that there's different nipples, different level of nipples, and this was actually a level 4 nipple. So I want to say there's 5 different levels of nipples for this bottle. And the best way that I can explain it is that this bottle actually the nipple just leaks into his mouth. So instead of the other, the Haverman bottle, with us having to express it for him, as he holds it in his mouth, it's actually just leaking into his mouth, so he's able to drink on his own. So this bottle actually works great for him, and he's currently on this bottle still, so he's doing good. Let's see. So I talked about his first surgery, his second surgery, his third surgery. Okay, so after he was released from the hospital, of course he had to have a physical therapy in the hospital for his shoulder. He had to have a speech and eating, I want to say this, yeah, a speech and eating therapist. I'm not sure what they're called, to be able, so that we could train, because we had to be able to feed him before he was released. We went through the CPR classes. He went through the car seat challenge. He passed that. So that was the last thing before Gus was able to get released from the hospital. Now, before he was released, me and my husband had to stay 2 days there at the hospital with him. And it's like if we were at home. We had to do everything for him. We had to bathe him. We had to change him. We had to feed him. And that was so that they could monitor us to make sure that we were doing okay, and also to monitor Gus to make sure that he was doing okay. Now, he was released from the hospital after 56 days. So over the 56th day, he was released, and I was so excited, guys. I was so excited to finally take my baby boy home to be with me and to be with my husband. And of course, my family wanted to see him, and it was a little overwhelming because at the time that he was in the NICU, it was during flu season. So me and my husband were the only ones allowed to go in there to see him. And this was mainly because they wanted to be able to monitor and control who was coming in and out of the NICU. And also because of the flu season, it was such a bad flu season this past year. They wanted to make sure that, you know, that if anybody that was going in was not sick, and we would have to wash our hands, we would have to sign in and out each time we went in the NICU, even if we went out for a potty break or to go get some food downstairs or to go to the restroom, we had to sign in and out. And this is so that they could monitor everybody. Now, the NICU, guys, oh my goodness, the NICU is actually a whole floor of babies. So there is literally, I want to say the highest number I saw was 68, the number 68. And the reason I say that is because each baby in the NICU is assigned a number, and that's how they are able to know who is where, what baby is where. And to go into the NICU, guys, and to see all those babies, I never realized until going in to go see Gus, to see how many sick babies they are, you know, and how many families go every day to go see their babies. And it was very hard for me to see that, because of course I just had a baby, and my emotions were kind of crazy, kind of all over the place. And I remember walking in with my husband, and I was tearing up, and he was like, "What's wrong? What's going on?" And I told him, like, this is very overwhelming for me to walk in and to see. I mean, you could see each individual depending on if they had a, you know, the severity of each baby. They would either be in a crib or a little, it was like a little bed, but it had, of course, the sides, clear sides for the babies. So just depending on how big the baby was, would depend on what they were in. And actually my baby Gus was actually the biggest baby in the NICU at the time. He was 9 pounds 11 ounces. And you know, the majority of all the babies that I saw in there were preemie babies, guys, and it was so tough. So I mean, it broke my heart to walk in there and to see all those babies, because when you're gonna have a baby, you don't think that anything's gonna happen. You think that you're gonna have a baby, the baby's gonna be healthy, and you're gonna go home. And it really opened up my eyes when I had Gus, and when he was diagnosed with PRS, and he had to be in the NICU for so long. I mean, 56 days is a long time for me, but I had run into another mother, and she had been in the NICU for 8 months, guys. 8 months. And her baby had a heart condition. And I remember when Gus, you know, because you're on the NICU, and then they'll move you, once you start getting stabled, they moved him to another level, another floor level. And I remember them, me walking in, and I remember seeing that family, that lady there, because she was right by Gus. Her baby was right by Gus, and I remember seeing them, and they were sitting there. And my whole journey, you know, I would see her day, you know, every few days we would see each other. And I remember, you know, we would have little conversations. And I remember when they were moving Gus to the stable floor, and she asked, you know, we would ask each other how the babies are doing, and I remember them moving me up to the stable floor with Gus, and I felt so bad because she had been there longer than me. And I know that it must have been hard for her to see me and my baby move up to the stable floor, and it was really hard, guys, to see all those babies, and I couldn't, the families are helpless, you know, they go every day, and some people, you know, some of the families, they're unable to help their babies. All they can do is just sit there. And I felt so bad for that lady, because she had been there so long. And I remember talking to a nurse, And she had said, you know, we've had babies here that are up to 1 to 2 years. And I think that it's so hard, you know, it must be so hard for the families to deal with that, because the NICU that my baby was in, I was blessed that it was only an hour away. Some of the families that I had spoken with lived 4, 5, 6 hours, and guys, they were only able to travel 1 to 2 times a week. So it was really hard for me, and really hard for them. So I would pray for them, and I would pray for their baby, and it was really tough, guys. I know that I keep saying that, but it has been such a tough journey for Gus, for me. And so back to his surgery. He went home, he was released. He had his distractors, which are the distractors in his jaw, were actually removed at 4 months old, guys. So that was a surgery that we had to prepare for, and it was overwhelming as well. He went into the surgery went great. He came out, and his face, guys, was so swollen, and he was awake, of course, and he was crying. I remember them coming out of the elevator, and he was just crying and crying. So I went to him, and the nurse that was there with him had a bottle, and she's like, he's not wanting the bottle. And I told her, it's because he can't drink it. He needs a special bottle to drink. And she looked at me like she was so sorry, like she didn't know. And as soon as we went back into the room, guys, we gave him, of course, his bottle, our bottles that we brought, and he was drinking, and he settled down. He was fine. But he was really swollen, guys. He did have one complication coming out, and it was his breathing. His breathing was really fast and heavy. So the doctor was a little concerned with that. So they were monitoring him for a while. It was about an hour or two, and then finally he was just able to kind of just calm down. So that was the only complication with that fourth surgery. So Gus does have one more surgery that's going to be in January, which is at his 11th month. And that's going to be to fix his cleft palate on the roof of his mouth. And that's going to be his last surgery. And I'm nervous. I'm nervous for that, because I've seen on YouTube other families that have babies that gone through PRS, that have PRS, I'm sorry, and their cleft, you know, they have the repair of their cleft palate, and it's hard. Some of the moms have explained that there's, you know, blood coming out of their mouth and stuff, and it's just, I think I'm just really anxious about the surgery, because I want him to be okay, even though I know that he will be okay. It's just, he's been through so much, and I don't want to see him go through that, you know, go through the pain. And I'm just really nervous about that surgery, but I am grateful that it's going to be the last surgery for him. And because he has a cleft palate, he's going to need a speech therapist. So they are going to give him a speech therapist after the surgery, because his speech is going to have a little bit of a delay. So what I've decided to do with Gus, I've actually introduced to him, was ASL, American Sign Language. So he knows the basics, guys, rather, I would say the basics, like milk. He knows milk. He knows more. He knows food. He knows drink. He knows juice. He knows daddy. He knows mommy. He knows grandma, grandpa. So I've just introduced kind of the basics to him. And this is not because he cannot hear or he has a learning disability. He does not. He is great. I just want him to be able to communicate with me. I want it to be easier for him, because I know that he's going to have a speech delay and it's going to be harder for him. I want to make things as easy as possible for him. So I've introduced ASL to him, and I'm hoping, and I know that it's going to be great for him. It's going to be a great tool that he'll not only know how to speak, he'll know how to do sign, which is going to be pretty amazing to see. And I'm excited for this journey. I do apologize if this video is kind of long, but his journey has been a long journey, and it's not something that you can put into a short video. But I hope that I'm able to help another family out there that may be going through this. And if you haven't subscribed already, I would love for you to be on this journey with me and Gus, and like this video, guys. And I will be doing more videos in the future. I just don't know what yet, but I'm excited for Gus's journey. So I hope that you're able to subscribe and join us in our journey together. Okay, guys? Well, I hope you enjoyed this video. And if you guys have any comments, like any questions or anything on Gus's surgeries, let me know, and I will be able to answer them to the best that I can. Okay, guys? All right. Well, thank you again for watching this video. We'll see you. Bye.